Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my wonderful co-host Keith Glasser. Keith, how we doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. This week we're gonna do a little Q&A session. We've got some questions from some listeners out there, so shout out for the communication on their end. So we got 4 or 5 questions we're going to cover in this episode, and hopefully we can answer these effectively and provide some responses that people find useful. So let's kick it off, Coach. For the first question, it's a popular one. It's one that a lot of parents and kids seem to want to have some insight into. And the question is, how is the transfer portal impacting the recruitment of high school players? So let's tackle this one.
Yeah, loaded question. I think it's going to be a hot topic for another 365 plus days because there's still some COVID years out there. So you're going to have more people in there. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast about the transfer portal and the impact and why college baseball is more competitive and such. And I think it's going to. The pendulum is going to swing back eventually. I think a lot of people in the business are, kind of hyperbolic about everyone just recruiting people out of the transfer portal, which, I think you can plug some holes there. But I think, there's still high school kids still have to be recruited, right? Like you can't, I've had a couple of people be like, oh, everyone's recruiting out of the transfer portal. Like, you can't just enter the transfer portal out of high school. Like you still have to go to college in order to get into the transfer portal. So the high school kids still have to be recruited. And there's only so many JUCO spots out there that are available. They're not even considered in the portal. And there's different levels of JUCO as well. There's really good JUCO and there's average to below average, just like there is at Division 1, 2, 3 NAIA. So, I think that it certainly impacts it, but I don't necessarily think that it's, a huge detriment. I still think if you have the skill set to be able to play college baseball, you are going to be able to be recruited because you are a recruitable student athlete. Now, the one difference might happen over the next year or two, or maybe even further. That remains to be seen. But those fringe guys that used to get spots at the mid majors, like those guys might now be playing Division 2 and Division 3 baseball, which adds to the same conversation that we've said 1,000 times that college baseball is super competitive. So, I don't think it's going to see, your top end guys are still going to go play Division 1 baseball. The guys that have the skill set. And I personally feel that, the middle of the field is still going to be recruitable from a high school standpoint, catchers, pitchers, middle guys, center fielders. I think college coaches might be, and this is just my personal feeling, a little bit more apt to kind of plug from a transfer portal standpoint or a JUCO standpoint the corners. Some bats and some guys that can defend a little bit on the corners with guys who have college experience. But by and large, I think if you can play defense or you can really hit or you're really good on the mound, you're going to find yourself getting recruited, especially if you're playing in the middle of the field. So, I think you're going to see some, I don't think you're going to see a huge downturn in high school recruitment. There you might see a little bit, but nothing to where I'm like, it's a huge factor that's going to factor into what everyone is doing from a recruiting standpoint. High school guys are still going to get recruited in college baseball. It's the lifeblood of the sport.
Yeah, I think you hit on a good point. I think it's going to affect the fringy guys. Those right-handed pitchers who are 84 to 87 that have some projectability. Like if you don't feel really good about that kid, or he's more of a walk-on type or a low scholarship guy, like some of the Division I schools might be a little bit hesitant to go on that kid because they know they can go into the portal and get somebody who's already proven. So I think some of the fringy guys, it's going to affect them. But to your point, the lifeblood of programs is still going to be high schools. And of course there's going to be outliers, right? Like we've seen some stuff on Twitter about, having 28 transfers come in, and like, you're going to have programs that are going to run their program that way. And that's fine. Like from a coach's perspective, like I think it's important to understand it as a recruit and as a parent that these coaches need to win games. And if they have a mechanism to go get a kid who's more ready to help them play, or I should say more ready to play right away and help them win games, like the coach is going to go do that. But I don't think that the majority of schools are still going to be very active in identifying high school players that they think have a chance to help them. I don't think that that's going to change. You might see the numbers go down a touch. Like instead of bringing in 10 or 11 high school kids in a recruiting class, it might be 7 or 8, and you leave a couple scholarships open for the portal. Maybe you go a little bit heavier into the transfer portal if you lose some underclassmen to the draft or some guys leave the program. It's out there, but I think if you're smart and you do a little bit of homework and you have some people telling you the right things and giving you good information, that it's pretty easy to identify programs that are going to be super heavy in the portal. And if that's something of concern, then you avoid those programs. Like it's not hard to identify the programs that are really active in the portal, and that's a big piece of what they do. And you just need to be cognizant of the fact that it's out there and it's real. But I hate the connotation that it's a bad thing, because I think that that's a lazy way to look at it. Like when we've talked about this, it's 17 and 18-year-olds don't always make perfect decisions, and things change. You could get injured, or you could get there and just realize, like, listen, I'm not going to play, and I want to go somewhere where I have a chance to play. Like, I think this idea that everybody who enters into the portal is jumping ship because they've quit on stuff, I think that's a lazy way to look at it. And I think each kid's individual journey in this is different, and you kind of have to respect that. And I think it's a good thing that kids have an opportunity to maybe right or wrong. Now, with that being said, if you're a high school kid listening to this and you're looking at like, I'll just commit and then I'll go into the portal if it works out, like you're probably viewing it through the wrong lens. Like you need to work. Freshmen don't typically, most freshmen aren't going to start every single day when they get to campus. Like those kids are still the outlier in terms of how this all works in college baseball, and that goes for every single level. But yeah, it's going to affect kids. I think it's raised the floor big time. Like I think Division III baseball is going to shoot up in terms of the amount of talent. We've seen it in recent years. Like you're getting kids who are walking on campus 87, 88, 89. Like that's a normal thing at the Division III level. And I think that's a hard thing for people to wrap their head around, how good that level of baseball is. And I think the transfer portal has impacted that, because you get the kids who went to the SEC or an ACC and camp aren't going to end up playing there, and they go to a mid-major. So now the mid-major schools are passing on some kids that they would usually take, and those kids are ending up at Division II and Division III schools. So I think it's just going to lift it up, and it's important to understand that it's out there and it's real. But this take that coaches only recruit the transfer portal, I think it's false. I think it's still going to be an important piece of the puzzle, but it's definitely going to have an impact. But there's ways to combat it, and there's a thoughtful way to go about it in terms of being able to identify a school that's a good fit for you. Not for you personally, Keith, but the general you, the universal you.
Yeah, I think you hit on something where there are programs out there that are going to do a lot of recruiting in the transfer portal, and I think that especially in the climate that is recruiting right now, it's a fair question if you are being recruited to ask, how many players are you going to have on the roster in the fall? Like, that you should be okay asking that question. And if there's programs that are, doing a lot of recruiting out of the portal, like they should be honest with, hey, we're bringing in a lot of guys, and there could be a multitude of different reasons. It could be a staff change. It could be, they got gutted by the draft, or, whatever it might be, and they might say like, hey, yeah, we're looking to bring in 40, we're going to have 45 guys next fall, and we're offering you a chance to try out. And I think that, working through that stuff and trying to make the most informed decision, if you're working with somebody, or you have your coaches, or if it's just you and your parents going through this, like those are fair questions to ask. And if you are working with someone and your coaches and they talk to staff, like it's a fair question for them to ask too. Like they should know that if you're going to a place where there's going to be 50 guys on the roster in the fall, 10 of those players are getting cut. Like, and there's a little around it too. Like there might be some guys, if it's 44, where 3 or 4 of those guys are going to be redshirted because they're hurt and stuff like that. Like it's a little different. But if you start creeping in the high 40s and 50s, there's a big difference between 42, 43, 44 guys in the fall and 49, 50, 51. And you should know that, because you have to know going in. And especially if you're not offered a scholarship and it's just a walk-on tryout, for the fall, where you get the whole fall, you have to be better than, let's say there's 51 guys. You got to be better than 11 or 12 guys just to make the roster. So like those are things that you need to know going into this as well. And you can't necessarily, like, this is what this is right now in college baseball. And everyone can complain about it, and you can hit the boards and you can tweet about it and you can complain, and we can light up all the programs that do this to shine a light. Like a lot of, I'm not going to say everybody, a lot of college baseball is doing this. So until rules change, it's going to continue to happen. You can tweet about it. You can put teams on programs on blast. It doesn't matter. They're going to continue to do it. So ask the question and be informed before you go there. Because they'll tell you, like, yeah, we're looking to bring in a lot of guys because, we're returning 10 guys. So we're bringing in a ton. And the transfer portal is an easy way to do it for a lot of these programs, because there are so many high school guys that you can go after, right? Like you could load up on 30 high school guys, but you're, at college level, you're probably not going to be that good right away. And the transfer portal is an easy way to plug those holes and be competitive. So you need to know that information. Ask the question if you're being recruited, like, hey, how many guys are on the roster in the fall? It's a fair question to ask, because if you're being recruited by multiple schools and one school tells you there's 52 and another school tells you that it's 40, like, okay, like I have a really good chance to make the team because they're only allowed 40 and they're only bringing in 40. They bring in 53. And it's a lot of programs that do this. It's not just the one-offs you see on social media. Like it's not. And you should ask those questions and know that stuff, because this is how it is right now. And unfortunately, there are programs that do it, but you have to know that if you're getting a walk-on spot, or if you're given the whole fall to try out, you have to know that, like, you have to be better than 12, 13, 14 guys just to make the roster. That's not even playing time. That's not even burn in the spring. That's making the roster. So like, I see some of these things and people get mad about it, and it's like, it's kind of on you. Like you should have known that going in. And if you didn't, it's kind of on you. Like those are things that you should know before you make this decision to go to that school. So, I'm not a huge proponent of doing it. I get why coaches do it. I coached this game for 16 years. I understand why. And again, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I get why they do it. But you have to know, if you're being recruited, that that's going on. And if you don't know, and then you complain on the back end that, there was 54 guys and I got cut, and this, like, it's kind of on you, man. Like you should have known that going in before you made that decision, because if that was the only, like, if that's likely not the only school recruiting you, you probably could have found a better fit somewhere else. And, I'm not putting all the onus on the kid or the family, but like we talk about all the time, the people you surround yourself with, you have to know that is a possibility going in. And if that does end up happening, like, you can't come on the back end and complain about it. Like, you knew it going in. So
the other thing that doesn't get talked about enough is that people just make these sweeping statements on social media about the transfer portal. Like, these coaches just don't care about any of their players. It's like, that's not how coaches don't make this stuff lightly. Like, they don't make these decisions lightly. Like, but the fact of the matter is you have to make decisions, and it's really that simple. And like, at a certain point, players and like student athletes who are listening to this, like, you're not in high school anymore, and people don't do favors. Like, if you want to make a roster, if you go as a walk-on or you go as a kid who gets a fall, you need to be undeniable. Like you need to put yourself in a situation where coaches are sitting down, whether they have 42 guys on campus and they need to cut 2, or they've got 55 guys on campus and they need to cut 15. It's on you to be one of the 40 guys.
Right.
And you control that, and you control the effort you show up with. And a lot of times when you're making back end of the roster decisions, it's not always about how good the kid is. A lot of times it's about how good of a kid the kid is. Because let's be honest, like even when you get to 40, dude, not everybody's playing. Period. If you've got 22 arms and 18 position players, there's 12 dudes that'll probably throw innings, and there's 13 guys who will get at bats in any kind of volume that is significant. And so even if you make the roster, like you still, like if you're going to be the 40th guy on the back end of the roster, sometimes it's not how much can you do to impact the program on the game. Sometimes it's how much can you impact the program from a personal perspective, from a character perspective. Do you show up every day? Are you a good teammate? Do you do all the stuff that you're supposed to do? Are you a pain in the ass to the coach? Like, that's why I hate that you see these people calling out programs, and, I get it. They're trying to stick up for their kids, but like, especially when it comes from people who have been involved in this game for a long time, like you should know better. Period. Like you should know better. You should know what this entails. And the other thing too, and I think we've mentioned this a couple times, people act like this is the first time kids got cut.
Right.
Well, the only reason you hear about it is because of social media. But 15 years ago, before Twitter and Instagram were popular, the same stuff was happening. But kids didn't have an out back then.
Correct. And I think the other thing too, and this is my last 2 points on this, but it's like anything else. You get one side of the story, right? Because you can put the program on blast and do whatever you want to do, but like they're not going to get on not going to say everyone, but the vast majority of them are not going to get on social media and blast, shoot back at it, because then, it's not worth their time, energy, or effort, because what's done is done. So it's, you can do it all you want, but it's just trying to validate whatever it is that you're feeling in the moment. There was a famous guy we played for who used to say, when emotion walks in, reason walks out. And I think that is applicable in that instance. But the last point I'll make on it is that I don't necessarily know either with the transfer portal, how many schools at the Division I level specifically, because the roster limit is capped at 40, like not every single program is going to have the funds and everything to carry 40 guys. So I don't, like, there's another reason why I don't necessarily know if, they might still dip in a little bit, but I don't necessarily know how many people are like, some of your mid majors, like they might not be able to afford 40, or 40 is their max and they can't do any more. So I don't see this being an issue at everywhere in Division I. I think the programs that can afford it and can do that stuff, it's, that's where we're talking about this. And I still think that the lifeblood of this game is going to be high school kids.
Agreed. Well said, Coach. All right, question number 2. We won't be as salty about this one. We could talk about the portal for a long time because there's a lot to it, but it'll take us down a couple rabbit holes that'll get us off track. But the next question this seems to pop up, and when we're talking to parents or and stuff that's come up on social media here, is around the timing of exposure and like when should you spend money to get in front of coaches, and when does that start for kids? And I think like any other question, there's some nuance to this as well, because you need to line up your talent level with what coaches are evaluating at that point and the cost, right? Like for me, this conversation always starts with, where are you from a physical perspective relative to your class and how college coaches are recruiting that class, right? Like if you're a 2026 right now and you have aspirations of playing college baseball and you're a right-handed pitcher who throws 75, you probably don't need to be going out and spending a bunch of money to try to get exposure or to get your numbers up. Like if you go to a PBR event or a perfect game event and you top out at 75, like you didn't help yourself at all. And the money that you spend to go to camps and you go to showcases, it can be better spent from a development perspective, period. And I don't, for me, that's really cut and dry. Like you gotta have an honest evaluation of where you are. And instead of spending $500 to go to the showcase with 50 coaches as a 2026 or a 2027, you really got to look yourself in the mirror and go, well, am I recruitable right now? And if you are, then yeah, you might be able to justify spending that money. But if you're not, spend money on development, spend money on a strength coach, spend money on a pitching coach, like use that money for something else. And then, as your timeline gets closer and closer to when you're recruitable is when you need to think about getting in front of coaches. And that's, I think, probably for me, the most fundamental part about the timing of the exposure piece is don't rush to get recruited, because you need to be recruitable before you get recruited. And all of that comes relative to your talent level and the timing of which schools are recruiting players. Like if you're 2027 right now, even if you're the best kid in the country, if you're the best kid in the country, like who cares? You're fine. Like just keep doing what you're doing. People will know about you when it's time. But if you're 27 and you're just chomping at the bit to go get evaluated, like you don't need to. You just need to continue on your course of development. You need to focus on let's be a good high school player first before you worry about being a college prospect. So I know that sometimes that's a tough conversation because parents and kids think, well, if I'm not out there, then I can't get recruited. And it's like, well, if you're not recruitable, you're not going to get recruited anyway. So you're kind of you're throwing money at a problem that money isn't going to solve that problem right now.
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think if you're going to take it a step further, like, if you're 27, like, maybe one during the season, and then, try to focus on a couple of schools that you're interested in that are having camps in the fall to hit up. 26, maybe, a handful more, 3, 4, and then same thing, try to get in front of the coaches it is that you want to be recruited by. I think that there's so many events out there that you can go down a rabbit hole pretty quickly of all these events you want to go to and, become a frequent flyer. And, if all the coaches are there, like, and those are the schools you're trying to get recruited by, and you have the socioeconomic means to do it, then, let it rip. But I think for the vast majority of people out there, you're going to have, a lot more, you want to have a lot more of a targeted kind of approach to the schools it is that you're trying to get recruited by. But, if you're younger, I think the money is better spent on development, strength and conditioning, things like that, because you can see huge jumps from kids between freshman and sophomore year, between sophomore and junior year. Like you can make huge jumps. And if you're doing more from a development and a strength and conditioning standpoint while also playing in there, like that's, I think, one piece that we talk, like, can sometimes get lost when we talk development. Like you develop playing too. Like you want to be playing while also focusing on development in the off season, and then strength and conditioning and such like that. You can see huge jumps in your game where you can really start to become recruitable in what it is that what your goals and aspirations are. But it's, for me, it's always been, you want to try to get in front of the schools that you want to be seen by. You can spend a lot of money and go to school, go to camps and clinics and showcases and stuff, and there's not a lot of people there or schools that aren't even, recruiting you are at. So, I do think the only slight pushback I would say is, like, if you're going to an event as a younger kid to get your metrics up, like, I would make sure that it's something where, like, it's a substantial jump, right? Like you went to a showcase as a freshman and you were 72 to 74 and now you're 80 to 81. Like, sure, if you want to go do that and you're 82, 83, like, yeah, go do that, because it'll hit your profile. Coaches can see it. They can see the development, like they can see the progress a little bit there, but if you went to a showcase and you're 74, 76 and you're 77, 79, like it's not really going to move the needle a whole hell of a lot. So, I would say, like, if there's something in there where there's a substantial jump, whether it's going to be your 60 time or your arm velocity or your, pitching velo or your whatever it might be, if there's a substantial jump and you want to do something to kind of increase your metrics somewhere, like, sure, it's not a huge deal. But I wouldn't do it if it was like, all right, I ran a 7.1 last year and now I'm a 7.0. Like, I want to get it better. Like, that's not going to move the needle a whole hell of a lot. So, now if you were a 7.1 and now you're a 6.7, like, that's going to move the needle a little bit. Like, sure. But that's the only slight pushback I would say on the metrics piece. But again, the caveat is, like, it's got to be a substantial increase to where it's going to actually move the needle to where you can be recruitable, or you might, kind of step up the ladder a little bit.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is it's a lot easier to make these kind of decisions if you have somebody in your corner who can give you good information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially around the timing piece. Like, if you have somebody who can look you in the face and say, hey, it's not time for you to go do this, that's way more valuable than somebody telling you what you want to hear and going to a showcase and not being able to put together a performance that's gonna move the needle at all. And I think timing's important, and I think having a clear understanding of where you fit in the whole grand scheme of things helps you make a lot better decisions when it comes to this stuff. I think that takes us into the next question pretty cleanly, which is, and I know we have some thoughts on this, is what are the best events for exposure? And kind of where I'll lead with this is that I think being targeted in your recruiting process allows you to have a better experience from an exposure perspective. Like, I know you are too. Like, I'm a huge proponent of the on-campus camps for a multitude of reasons. But if you have somebody who's able to give you good information on where you might fit in the grand scheme of things, and they understand what a program might be looking for in your particular class, and you can do some really targeted exposure, one, it's usually cheaper. And two, you just get a much more personal experience. You get to meet with coaches. You get a chance to be on their campus. You get a chance to feel out how they actually coach and how they react to certain situations, how they communicate with players. And, a lot of times you're on the field with guys that are comparable from a player's perspective that those coaches are looking at. So you get a good feel of kind of where you fit in the grand scheme of things. So specifically early on in the process, I think it's really important to be thoughtful about where you go and when you go. And I think the on-campus camps are a great way to do it. From my perspective, I think that's usually where you start. Instead of spending $1,000 to go to an event with 50 or 70 coaches early on, I think you're better spending $125 to go to 4 or 5 different schools that you think could be a really good fit, because you've got good information on where they stand from a recruiting process. And, if you get later in the process and like you're 2025 and, you're one of those guys who's not 100% sure where you fit and you want to put your eggs in a basket, like, yeah, the head firsts and the show balls and the best in the US is, like, I think that they have a very important place in the recruiting process, but you need to understand where you sit and make sure that those schools that are there are the ones that you're looking at. If you're going to spend that kind of money to go get a showcase. So that's kind of my spiel on the best chance for exposure. And I would usually default to the on-campus stuff. I think that's where your money's best spent.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that if you're looking for a metrics type thing, like a PBR is probably good for you. A best in the US or even a perfect game. I haven't been to a perfect game event in years. Not saying anything negative about it. Just I don't even know where they are anymore. But I think that there's, like, you can track some metrics there, and coaches will always, when they Google you, you'll pop up in perfect game or PBR, and they can kind of see what you've done and where you've been from that standpoint. So, it's not the worst idea if you're, looking to do something a little bit different and maybe have a broad range of schools you're looking to get in front of and have an online presence there. But I think to start, like, finding some college camps of programs you're interested in, we've talked about this before too, like, there's usually going to be a handful of other coaches that are at those events too. I don't know if there's going to be, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 15. It honestly depends on the school. It depends on the program. It depends on what they're doing. So it's worth asking, if you're going to a camp, like, hey, like what other schools are going to be there, and you might get 5, 6, 7 eyes of different programs on you as well, which can give you a little bit more feedback too. But I think the smaller numbers and finding some showcases where it's not 150 kids or 320 kids, like, some smaller numbers where coaches can really bear down and be able to watch and see what it is that you're doing. And then as you kind of progress and get older and, then you can kind of step into the realm of the bigger type showcases where there's a lot more kids and there's, 50, 60, 70 coaches that are there to watch, because they're, you're being recruited by them. So getting in front of them is kind of paramount. But, I think on the same hand, like most of those events, those schools run their own camps. Like you can spend a lot less money and go to their own camp, and be seen by quite a few of those coaches. So, I think it depends on your socioeconomic background and then, really where it is that you're being recruited and then what you're trying to get out of it.
Well said. Next question on the list. This is I think for me, this is kind of a two-parter, but how much of a role do standard metrics like your 60 exit velocity, arm speed, arms velocity, pop time, how much of a role do those standard metrics play in identification as well as the evaluation? And the reason I kind of do this as a two-part is that I think it's important to understand that they play a role in identification, but they're a very small part of the evaluation, because your one-shot bullpen where you had 15 pitches and hit 89 is a great way to get on a coach's radar, but they still need to see you pitch. They still need to see you compete. They still need to see you operate in a game setting. They need to find out, is that 89 just an anomaly where, you can do it in the first inning, but you can't hold velocity, or do you pitch at 84, 85? Same thing with exit velocity. Like, it's great. Like, if a kid has 100-mile-an-hour exit velocity, that's a great place to start. He's got some bat speed. He's got the ability to get the barrel going. He has the ability to impact the baseball and hit the baseball hard. But as a coach, I still need to find out if you can actually hit. I still need to find out if you can manage an at bat. Do you have the ability to handle velocity? Can you recognize spin? Do you manage the strike zone? Can you do the other pieces of the offensive game that are really important? Can you run the bases? Can you play the small ball game? Like, do you have enough feel for the barrel where you can move runners? Like, you got to get a lot more of the evaluation than just beyond those metrics. So my stance on this would be, it never hurts to have really good metrics. But you have to understand that just because you have a certain number posted on your profile doesn't mean that you're good enough to play anywhere, right? Like, you still have to be able to do things. And there's other pieces of the evaluation process that coaches are going to weigh much more heavily than how hard did you hit a baseball when nobody was trying to get you out, or how hard did you throw a baseball in a 15-pitch bullpen. It's a lot deeper dive than that. And yeah, it's a good place to start, but there's no coach in the world that we've talked to that tells you that they're recruiting a guy solely off of what they did in a controlled environment in a workout.
No, I mean, I'm going to echo what you say, but it's the old adage of there's a lot of 5 o'clock hitters, and for those of you that don't know, that comes from old time baseball players, of guys who could really, really show up and hit unbelievable BP, and you put them in a game and they can't hit. You took BP at 5, they were unbelievable. You play at 7, they couldn't hit. So like I think being able to flash some metric numbers and do some things from a showcase metric standpoint kind of gets eyes on you. But at the end of the day, you still got to be able to play the game. If you're a pitcher, you still got to be able to flood the zone with strikes. You got to be able to get swings and misses. You got to be able to get outs. You got to be able to hold runners. You got to be able to control the running game. You have to be able to field your position. If you're a position guy, you got to be able to run the bases. You have to have a pretty high baseball IQ and understand where you need to be depending on, what type of position you are. If you're a catcher, like, yeah, your pop time's great. And, I've said my piece on this, and you can find a bunch of podcasts that we've released here where I don't. It's the only thing we can measure metrically in a game. But if you're a catcher, like, you have to actually catch the baseball. I mean, it's the most important piece of being a catcher. You have to be able to block the baseball. You could be a 1-8 thrower all day long, and there's some out there, but if you can't catch it and you can't block it, I can't put you back there. It's one of the most important positions defensively on the field. The pitchers have to be able to have confidence in you. They have to know that in 1-2, 0-2 counts, if they want to spike a breaking ball in the dirt, that they can, and you're going to stop it. And coaches need to know that if that happens, and there's runners on, you're going to smother that ball, and we're not going to allow it free 90. So I think that there's a lot more that goes into it than just what your metrics are, and we've talked about this before as well. Like, there's other people that don't necessarily flash unbelievable numbers from a metric standpoint, and then you watch them play the game, and they play the game hard. They play it the right way. They're always in the right position. They make all the plays, and they play a lot faster and a lot better than what a standard metric would tell you. So you can take BP all you want, but BP, game baseball is not a 45-mile-an-hour fastball from 35 feet right down the middle of the plate, or a little in or a little out to just kind of groove your swing and make you feel good. We got guys that are throwing upper 80s, low 90s, mid 90s, 100 with movement, snapdragon sliders in the 80s. Like, hitting is tough, and you have to be able to do it in game to be able to be recruited. So, the metrics piece is a great piece to kind of set the floor, but at the end of the day, you still got to be able to play this game, and that's what's going to get you recruited, is your ability to play the game. Conversely, the other part that's going to get you recruited is what type of teammate you are, what type of kid you are, how tough are you? How do you handle adversity? This game has so much adversity, and you're going to face it throughout your entire career. How do you handle that stuff? So it's a lot of other things that go into it. And I think that the baseball, the skill set standpoint is one of the easiest things for college coaches to be able to identify. The harder part is figuring out whether or not the kid's going to fit into your program, if you're going to be able to coach him, and does he possess those things? Like, if you're going to go pitch it Friday night in the ACC or the SEC, like, you got to have some thick skin if you're going to take the ball and toe the rubber on Friday night in the SEC. Like, there's going to be, you roll into Alex Box Stadium part 2, like, there's going to be 11, 12,000 people screaming. Like, you have to be able to block that out. So there's a lot more that goes into it. And I think that the character and the personal evaluation is, also plays a huge role in this. But, for the question's sake, for a straight metric standpoint, like, it gets your foot in the door. How you play the game and what you do otherwise is what gets you recruited.
Yeah, I'm glad you hit on that piece at the end, because it's a part that gets lost in the sauce sometimes, that everybody just thinks, well, if I'm super talented, like, I'll get recruited. Like, yeah, you'll get recruited, but you may not get offers. Like, you may not get opportunities if you don't have some of the character traits that coaches are looking for, and the toughness component, the ability to compete, the ability to handle adversity. Like, those are separators when you get to the next level. And there's not a coach that we've talked to that doesn't weigh that extremely heavily, because one thing that they'll tell you is there's no shortage of kids who are good enough from a pure talent perspective. Like, high school baseball and the youth baseball circuit is more talented than it's ever been. When you're talking about size and speed and arm speed and bat speed, like, there's just a ton of kids out there that have traits that translate to college baseball, but they're still ultimately, like, you need good people. You need competitive kids. You need kids who are coachable. You need kids who are going to be committed to what the process will be like when you get on campus. Like, are you prepared to handle the day in the life of a college baseball player? And, that's not for everybody. I've had some talks with some parents and families, and you walk them through what it's like to be a college baseball player, and they're like, well, shoot, we didn't know it was like that. Like, we thought it was just high school baseball with better players. It's like, no, it's a real thing. There's a ton of commitment that comes along with it. And, coaches are trying to find guys who do that kind of stuff. And then the gameplay stuff that goes beyond just the pure metrics is something that a lot of coaches have voiced to us, that they need kids who can do stuff that helps them win games. And, running fast and throwing hard and hitting the ball hard is part of it, but Can you play situational baseball? Can you play defense? Is probably the biggest thing that doesn't get talked about, is like you have to be able to defend. And understanding that this process and the evaluation process as a whole it incorporates a ton of information, and it incorporates a ton of different data points that coaches are collecting to ultimately make their decisions. So, don't think that just because you threw hard in a bullpen and your numbers look good on PBR that makes you a recruitable player. There's more there to it, and the quicker you recognize that, the easier it is for you to prepare for those moments and understand what coaches are really trying to get at. All right, final question for the Q&A. Outreach is a popular topic. So this question is, what's the best way to reach out to coaches? When should you start doing it? And what should be included? And for me, this starts, again, self-awareness, right? Like if you're 2026 and you're not a surefire Division I guy and you're probably trending more to the Division III level, yeah, you can start reaching out to coaches, but you're probably better suited just focusing on development, focusing on competing, knowing that the guys who are going to recruit you probably aren't that concerned with the 2026 class right now. So I think some self-awareness of who you reach out to and when you reach out to is really important, because you're just not going to get any return on your investment. You could sit down and send 100 emails, but if you send 100 emails to schools that you have no chance to play at, you're not going to get any responses. You're not going to get any love, especially if the timing's wrong too. So having some self-awareness in terms of what you do and when you do it from an outreach perspective, I think gives you a chance to get a little bit of a return on the time that you put in to pull that stuff together. So that's where I'll start that one off.
I think you should call and text their cell phone. Coaches love that. I'm joking, everybody. No, I think that you're dead on. Like it's, I don't necessarily think that, I'll push back a little bit. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to kind of, send a couple updates throughout the course of the season and, send your schedule. And especially if, you're a high school kid and you're looking to get recruited by a couple local schools, if you want to send them to some of the local schools that, you're interested in, your high school schedule, because they're likely going to get out and see some games. Like they can get some eyes on you and, maybe just see where you're at. And same thing with the summer, you get your summer schedule, you feel free to send it out, because you might end up at events that these coaches are at. And if, you're in their database, you fill out the questionnaire and show a little bit of interest, you'll get some stuff from them too. And, if you're at some events and they kind of looked through the guys who have contacted them to take some notes on them, like they might, but I think the important thing that you hit on is, if you're especially if you're likely going to be a Division III player, like those guys are just wrapping up their 24 class. Like they're going to get into the 25 class this spring and this summer. The 26 class they'll start to get into towards the end of the summer of guys that they've identified that might be able to fit into their program, and see if they can get into camp and do some stuff like that, and then follow up through the following year. So, I think it's understanding, to your point, where you fit in, and then where you're, who you're reaching out to. And I think sometimes, people get a little misconstrued on what's going on when coaches aren't necessarily responding in timely fashions and they're only getting camp invites. Like, keep in mind, that's the only thing they can do until August 1st going into your junior year. And the other part is they're playing right now. Like everybody's fired up with practice, and that's their first priority right now. So, sometimes it's going to take them a little bit longer to get back to some emails that they, otherwise during the fall and the summer, they might be a little bit more timely with it. So, if, it's just understanding where you fit in, who you want to reach out to, and then, just, sending some general updates and, again, filling out their questionnaire to kind of get into their database that shows a little bit of interest and kind of go from there. But, I think you're dead on about, what it is and the timing and where you fit in, and understanding, who you should be emailing from that standpoint. And, I know I joked about it, but the other part of it is like coaches, emails are the best way, because coaches can respond to them at their, like, when they can, right? Like if you try to call their office phone, there's a good chance, especially if you're a Northeast school right now, like they're not in their office for a good portion of the day, if at all. because they might be running groups. They might have practice in the morning and then doing other stuff in the afternoon. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes on. So calling their office phone isn't necessarily the best way to try to get in touch with people. Like email is the best because as it goes, they'll start to respond to you.
Yeah, I mean, as far as information that you want to include in those emails, the first tip I'd give is it doesn't need to be an essay. You don't need to include the reasoning behind why you want to be a college baseball player. Like as a coach, when you get that email, like I'm assuming that you're reaching out because you want to play college baseball.
Mm-hmm.
For me, what I'd like to see, and this is what coaches have echoed to us, is I need to know who you are. I need to know where you're from, high school travel ball stuff. I need to know who I can reach out to if I've got some interest. I want to know your GPA. If I'm an academic school and you can include your transcript, that's a great place to start. Need to know some basic metrics, and they need to be valid. Do not be hyperbolic with your metrics because you will get exposed. Like, don't tell a coach that you're 86 to 88 if you're not 86 to 88. Like, there's a little bit of wiggle room. If you tell me you're 86 to 88 and you show up and you're 84 to 86 and you top out at 87, like, okay, like, yeah, velo goes up and down for young kids all the time. But if you tell me you're 86 to 88 and I show up and you're 80 to 82, like, yeah, I'm never coming back. And that goes for like high school and travel ball coaches. When you're communicating with college coaches, do not be hyperbolic. Like, don't tell a coach something that isn't true because you're going to get exposed, and then you're going to ruin the trust that you may have with that coach. So make sure that the metrics are accurate, and then you got to have some video, right? It doesn't need to be some crazy production level video, but 2, 3, 4 minutes, some swings, ideally open side view, and then from behind catcher from an offensive perspective, from a pitcher's perspective. I like the open side, and then making sure you get some view that shows ball flight. So either behind the plate or from the second base, from behind the pitcher, kind of the second base view, if you will. And if you can include metrics in those videos, like if you've got TrackMan data or you've got velocity data that's valid, that's something that I would encourage guys to include. Specifically, if you have TrackMan reports and you're a pitcher, if I've got video of you and I've got your TrackMan data, I can make a pretty good evaluation of whether it's worth me going to watch you play. So keep it short, keep it sweet. Make sure that they know who you are, where you're from, basic metrics, include video, include academic information, and make sure there's a few people in there that the coach can reach out to so that they have any questions, especially if you're an underclassman right now, you're 26. Like, if you're going to reach out to somebody, there has to be somebody that coach can reach out to get additional information because they can't reach out or talk to you at all. So it's important to make sure that that's a part of the email that you send.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. I think that it's, the only thing I guess I will add is, if you're sending video and such, like, try not to make it a 10-minute long video. And then the easiest way, obviously, is to send a link. Most coaches aren't going to download all of the video to their computer and watch it and then save it. And the other is, like, there's a lot of people that are emailing those programs as well. So they don't necessarily have the time to sit down and watch 15, 10-minute videos throughout the course of the day. Get as much in there as you can in a short burst so that they can see what they need to see.
I think the only other thing I would add to this is that, we all know social media has become it's starting to play a much more prominent role in the recruiting process. So I think you can go and follow coaches that you're interested in. I'm still torn on the whole DM thing. You need to know what year you are. Like, if you're 25 and you're going to DM a coach, like, they can respond. I don't know if I would necessarily expect them to respond, but if you're 26, you can't do it. So don't do it. But showing some interest by following coaches on Twitter is a good way to let them know. Like, it's kind of like poking them in the shoulder, like, hey, coach, I'm here. I'm interested in your school. So that's certainly something you can do. And then as far as the social media profile goes, this is important, I think, is in your profile, make sure that you have all your pertinent information. Who you are, where you're from, who you play for, some basic metrics. And if you can put a link to a YouTube video or you can put a link to a video in your profile, that's a nice little one-stop shop, and just understand that that's part of your athletic resume. So make sure that what you're tweeting is relevant to baseball. Like you don't want coaches to go on there and cross you off the list because you were posting some stupid stuff that could turn a coach off. So try to keep it to baseball, and make sure that coaches have access to information that's relevant to them in the recruiting process right there in your profile. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.